This is the crazy story of the 400 million no-limit empire which was destroyed by its own family in the craziest of ways. Percy Miller started with just $10,000 and built a 400 million rap empire in under a decade. He had the hip-hop industry in the palm of his hand, but lost all he had in just 5 years. This is the rise and fall of Master P building the empire. With no exaggeration, Percy Miller grew up with nothing. Not the kind of nothing where things were just a little tight. He really had nothing going for him. He was born in 1970 in New Orleans, Louisiana, in a neighborhood called the Calliope Projects. This was one of the most dangerous housing projects in the entire country, complete with drugs, violence, and funerals for people too young to go. That was everyday life in the Calliope, and Percy grew up thinking that was just how the world worked. He had a dream, though, but unlike most people around him, it had nothing to do with music at first. Percy wanted to play basketball, and he was good enough at it to earn a scholarship to the University of Houston. That scholarship was everything to him, the only way out of a neighborhood that had already swallowed too many people he knew. And for a moment, it looked like Percy Miller was actually going to make it out clean. But then, something unexpected happened. During a game in his freshman year, his knee gave out, and just like that, the dream he had for years was gone completely. With nothing else to lose, Percy did what he'd been trained to do on the streets when one door closes and he's powerless against it. He found another one. With a bit of hard work, he was able to transfer to Merritt College in Oakland, California to study business. And while he was out there, something happened that would change everything. His grandfather had suddenly passed away in a workplace accident, and Percy Miller received a $10,000 settlement check. Most people at the time would have bought a car, settled some debts, or paid some bills. The best could have saved it. But Percy Miller did something no one expected. He opened a record store. He called it No Limit Records, but it was a small shop in Richmond, California. Nothing special to look at by industry standards, but Percy's mind was strictly stuck in the future he envisioned. He started selling music out of that store, including his own. Among the music he sold was his debut album, Getaway Clean, which came out in 1991. It was far from a smash hit. But it was a start, and Percy Miller gladly took the loss in exchange for the attention that came to the store as more people talked and laughed at his music. By 1995, he had moved the whole operation back home to New Orleans to find artists willing to give his label a shot. Among those he brought in were future music stars like Mystikal, Mia X, and Soulja Slim. His own brothers Corey, who rapped as C Murder, and Vyshawn Silk the Shocker also joined the roster, so much so that it functioned like a family business. With their help, he built a team that worked like a factory, recording fast and releasing constantly. They kept the costs low and the volume high, doing everything they could to pump out lots of music content while under a very limited budget. But one deal was going to change all of that. In early 1996, Percy sat down with Priority Records, one of the biggest distributors in the rap game at the time. And he negotiated something that almost no artist or label owner had ever pulled off before. Priority would press and ship the records, and his label would keep 85% of every dollar. And more importantly, No Limit would keep ownership of every master recording. In an industry where record labels made artists sign away everything and kept them broke for decades, every song and album would belong to him and No Limit forever. Amid worst expectations, the deal was successful and the future seemed bright. The music started selling and success felt inevitable. Later that same year, Ice Cream Man went platinum. By 1997, Ghetto D hit #1. The tank logo, the famous signature No Limit would become known for, started showing up everywhere. The album covers were designed to grab attention. Loud and gold and impossible to miss. Designed by a Houston-based company called Pen and Pixel that made every release look like a rap video poster. The label grew so popular that anyone with a remote interest in the industry could recognize a No Limit album from across the room. But his fortune went from successful to bizarre in 1998 when No Limit released 23 albums in a single year. 10 of them went platinum, 11 went gold, and Master P's own album that year moved nearly 500,000 copies in its first week alone, and eventually sold 4.5 million copies total. That was the best-selling album of his career. Yet the music was only part of it. Behind the scenes, Percy had built an entire business around the No Limit name that came with everything from a clothing line, film company, travel agency, to a sports management company. He had a real estate portfolio with at least 100 properties across the United States. He even signed Ricky Williams, the Heisman Trophy-winning running back, straight out of college. These were the kind of things Jay-Z would get credit for doing years later. Except Percy was doing it first, and doing so out of New Orleans. By the end of 1998, Black Enterprise magazine reported that No Limit Enterprises had generated over $110 million in revenue in a single year. Not long after, he was able to land Snoop Dogg and bring him into his label. Snoop at the time had left Death Row Records and needed a new home. He chose No Limit and made it an open affair. Now he told the entire industry that No Limit was real, that it was safe. Snoop dropped 3 albums under the tank, and each one sold over 1 million copies. From the outside, with a net worth now approaching $500 million, everything looked untouchable. Percy Miller had taken $10,000 and turned it into a $100 million machine in less than a decade. Better yet, he pulled this off from one of the poorest neighborhoods in America. He had done it without giving the industry a single thing it didn't earn. No label called the shots. He owned what belonged to him. He was very powerful, and the music empire was at its peak, yet, as it often is, empires don't fall from the outside. As we'll see, it usually starts from within, and as far back as 1999, the cracks were already starting to show. The first cracks. As his biggest critics would point out much later, the thing about running a machine this fast is that it quickly starts breaking down. And though No Limit was everywhere in 1999, it would take a few years to show his entire brand and business were standing in sinking sand all along. By January 2000, Percy had his hands on everything from sports management, film, real estate, and basketball. He had signed with the Fort Wayne Fury of the Continental Basketball Association after a No Limit employee literally asked the team's head coach to give his boss a tryout. The man who owned one of the biggest record labels in America was now suiting up for a minor league basketball team. With his success in music, Percy was able to make his childhood dream a reality. But while he was chasing his old dream, the music started slipping. The very same strategy that made No Limit unstoppable was quietly becoming a problem in the long term. 23 albums a year sounds impressive until the albums either stop being good or start to sound repetitive. Beats by the Pound, the group that started it all, was slowly beginning to burn out. Artists didn't feel any more inspired, as they too were being rushed into the studio before they were ready to work at their best. The workload got so intense that some songs were going out unfinished. The quality that had made people buy every single release was quietly draining away, and the fans were quick to notice long before Percy acknowledged there was a problem. And then came the intense competition. On the other side of New Orleans, a label called Cash Money Records had been watching everything Master P built. And in 1998, they signed a distribution deal with Universal Records worth $30 million over 3 years. Cash Money now had something No Limit had started to lose. They had a sound that felt alive, like a craft that took weeks to put together instead of the rushed content Percy's label had become known for. Manny Fresh was now producing music that sounded like New Orleans in a way that actually made people feel something. Juvenile dropped 400 Degrees and it was a different kind of monster. Reviews were good and new fans loved it. The Hot Boys were everywhere. Lil Wayne was just 16 years old at the time and already impossible to ignore. To put it simply, No Limit had built its empire on volume, and now Cash Money was building theirs on real demand. The audience started moving, and it didn't take long for the roster to start to move as well. Time ran fast, and Snoop Dogg's 3-year contract that once seemed long and convenient quickly expired. When the time came, it was clear Snoop Dogg had no intention to renew the contract. He walked away, then missed a call, and even his brother C. Murder was no exception. And among the last to leave was Beats by the Pound. They all gave the same generic reason every artist gave when asked why they were leaving a record label. They said they wanted creative freedom. One by one, the people who had made No Limit sound like No Limit were gone. What remained was the machine, but the machine had nothing left to run on. As we'll see, 2001 was the year that marked the start of his fall-off. The priority deal had just expired. That deal alone was what made Percy Miller one of the most powerful independent label owners in music history for a whole era. and now it is over. And what replaced it was a shadow of what it had been. To make ends meet, No Limit signed a new distribution deal with Universal Records. The terms were far from the same as those with Priority. For one, the advance was $10 million, which sounds like a lot until you remember that No Limit had been generating over $100 million a year just 3 years earlier. There was no doubt he was settling for the best deal the industry was still willing to offer, as his relevance faded away as the years went by. Not wanting to be put down by wrong expectations, Percy renamed the label the new No Limit. The releases kept coming as usual, but nothing charted. Nothing connected with the audience. As far as many long-term fans were concerned, the magic was gone and a new name on the door wasn't going to bring it back. But the worst was yet to come. Percy's situation went from sensational to controversial on January 12, 2002. On that day, a 16-year-old fan named Steve Thomas was shot. He lost his life inside a nightclub in Harvey, Louisiana. Percy's brother Corey, known to the world as C Murder back then, was identified as the shooter. The arrest sent a shockwave through what was left of No Limit's struggling reputation. Corey had been one of the label's most important artists, so much so that he was still affiliated with the rebranded record years after he had left to figure things out on his own. He was also an artist the media couldn't ignore. After all, his 1998 album Life or Death had gone platinum and peaked at number 3 on the Billboard 200. He wasn't just a rapper on the roster. He was family, and Percy was now entangled in his legal troubles. And that wasn't all. The legal battle over this crime lasted for years. There were 2 trials, witness recantations, and appeals that went all the way to the Louisiana Supreme Court. In 2009, Percy Miller was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to mandatory life in prison. Still, Percy never stopped fighting for his brother's release, publicly and loudly, for the rest of his career. But the conviction stuck. And as recently as February 2026, the Louisiana Supreme Court denied Corey's appeal for the 3rd time. He remains at the Louisiana State Penitentiary today. The label never recovered from the weight of it all. On December 17, 2003, No Limit Records filed for bankruptcy. The man who had generated $110 million in a single year and an estimated net worth approaching $600 million at one point was now listing his monthly income in court documents at less than $2,000. Miller owed the IRS $1.5 million in back taxes, and a film crew he had hired for his movie Uncle P sued him because he couldn't come up with $240,000 to pay the people who worked for him. The same man who once signed Snoop Dogg and Ricky Williams in the same year could not pay a budget film crew. That was how fast it went. But at least for the mainstream media, the irony didn't stop there. Most industry analysts at the time allegedly predicted his fall, implying that it wasn't because the industry destroyed him, not because some rival label outmaneuvered him. Everything fell in less than 6 years because the strategy that built the empire had a ceiling, and Percy had never planned for the moment he hit it. His model of pumping out endless songs once they had working melodies worked as long as the quality held and the team stayed together. The moment both of those things cracked at the same time, there was nothing underneath to catch the fall. But while Percy Miller was down, he wasn't out. At least not yet. Would he be able to redeem his name as a leading figure in the music industry? Or would his situation only get much worse? The long erosion. 2007 was the year Percy got to work on getting his assets together to make a change. Later that year, he put out a collaborative album with his son Romeo. The project was called Hip Hop History, and though it showed lots of promise at the start, it only sold 32,000 copies worldwide, a far cry from the 500,000 Miller sold each week at his prime. The math was brutal, and it didn't lie. It was clear music had nothing to offer him anymore. So he tried television by appearing on Dancing with the Stars in 2006, stepping in after his son Romeo dropped out due to an injury. He was partnered with professional dancer Ashley Del Grosso. Many thought they were a powerful combo of talent and veteran, but they only earned a combined score of 8 out of 30. That was the lowest score in the show's history at the time, and he was eliminated in week 4. The man who had once been one of the most feared businessmen in the music industry was being scored by judges in a ballroom dancing competition. This was hard to watch for many people, especially if you remembered what he had been a decade before. The basketball dream kept pulling at him too, although he showed a bit more promise in that regard. Between 1999 and 2004, Percy Miller not only played in the Continental Basketball Association, but also earned some preseason tryouts with the Charlotte Hornets and the Toronto Raptors. He also participated in the 2008 McDonald's NBA All-Star Celebrity Game, where he scored 17 points. But as expected by most at this point, none of it led anywhere professionally. However, it revealed something true about Percy Miller that the music industry had always obscured. He genuinely loved basketball more than rap. He had never stopped being the kid from New Orleans who wanted to play in the NBA. Music had been the vehicle to get there, and it seemed he had lost focus on what mattered the most. Meanwhile, the world kept moving without him. Streaming arrived and changed every rule that No Limit had been built on and was reluctant to adjust to. The volume model, releasing 23 albums in a year and flooding every shelf in every record store in America, meant nothing on online platforms like Spotify, where the shelf was infinite and the only thing that cut through was a song so good that strangers sent it to each other by 3 in the morning. Others like Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and Cole dominated this era because they were doing the opposite of everything No Limit had stood for. They all took their time and released less whenever reviews weren't good, and made every project feel like an event. Meanwhile, Percy kept pushing his family to reach heights he was no longer able to reach. His son, Romeo Miller, had grown up on the Nickelodeon sitcom Romeo and built a genuine following as a young actor and rapper. But the music never translated into the kind of commercial success that would have proven the No Limit name still carried weight with the new generation. Percy executive produced each of the releases, but the results were modest at best. The more he pushed, the wilder the reactions got, with critics started using the word nepotism out loud. The business ventures multiplied and scattered, with many of them sounding surprising to most today. From food products and nutritional shakes to CBD lines, cereals, and syrups marketed with a community-first message. Each new business entirely carried the same sincerity that had always defined Percy Miller. But for many, it was easy to see that the brand was now trying out too many things at once. It was trying to stand for 1,000 things outside of music, which came off as another way of saying it meant nothing at all. But those wouldn't be Percy's final attempts at seizing back the spotlight. In 2020, Percy became a prime topic of conversation when BET aired No Limit Chronicles, a 5-part docuseries covering the rise of the label. Fans and critics lived it, and it felt like the perfect love letter to loyal fans who had grown up with the Tank logo. For a moment, the conversation around Master P shifted back to legacy and respect in what he had actually built. But once again, the unexpected happened. Almost as quickly as it started, the conversation shifted again to C Murder, whose case resurfaced with renewed urgency. Troubles only escalated when Kim Kardashian got involved in 2023, calling the conviction unjust in a lengthy public statement. Although this seemed to be in favor of Percy's brother, the courts remained unmoved. It also didn't help that many within and beyond the industry felt Kim Kardashian was being completely out of touch with reality by doing that. Many, including fans of the Kardashians, were quick to point out how Kim knew very little about the situation, so much so that it was easy to poke holes in the reasons she gave for defending Percy's brother. Corey Miller stayed in prison, and as always, Percy kept fighting publicly for his brother while trying to rebuild something that the industry had already moved on from. By 2025, Percy Miller had been at this for over 30 years, and that was when he quietly made the most honest decision of his entire career. In July 2025, he announced his retirement from music. Percy Miller's final performance was at the Essence Festival in New Orleans on July 6th. To respectfully mark the occasion, the Louisiana legislature had named June 11th Master P Day in his honor. He had been inducted into the NOLA Walk of Fame and stood on the stage at that same location in the city where everything had started. He was surprised to see there were several thousand people who still loved and supported him. And in 2026, he referred to that moment as a bittersweet feeling he'd never forget. Then he walked off the stage and into a gymnasium. Earlier that year, he had been named head coach and president of basketball operations for the University of New Orleans men's basketball team. It was the best way he could stay in touch with the dream he had as a child. He also had the experience to make it work, as at this point he had already spent 2 decades coaching youth players through his Miller Ballers program. He did it so well at the time that DeMar DeRozan, one of the most respected players in the NBA, called Percy Miller a father figure who taught him not just basketball, but how to understand life and business. During the introductory press conference, Percy Miller went vulnerable for a moment on camera about his current job and how much more fulfilling it was despite being less financially rewarding. It was on paper. In his words, "Being a coach here and being able to save these kids' lives, take them off the street, help them get their college degree at a Division I school. It's so important to me." Thanks to a few ventures that eventually got off the ground, Percy Miller's net worth today reportedly sits at around $200 million. But the family business that generated much more in a single year was now gone forever. Now, let's discuss in the comments below. What other mistakes led to this collapse? Are you a fan of his work? We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it. Take care.